we have been planning for all of the users in the community. So the idea is that you're going to join on Doom Hydra and you're going to play against those bots. And it's been very, very complex. I am pretty much having to implement most of the net code from Doom. No one had done that before, but we are getting there.
Yeah. So while we had human players before, now it's AI agents, right? Going to simulate Cardano transactions for like PvE multiplayer kind of is a bit what's going on there. I might have seen the Doom Hydra demo. And that kind of kept you from UGraph, right? Another layer 2 technology a bit.
Yeah, I actually have an announcement probably by the beginning of the next week, but I built a team to work on UGraph. I have been coaching them for the past 2 or 3 weeks, just so I can be able to focus on it.
Yeah. So we'll maybe have some UGraph news or kind of agenda items another time, maybe.
100%.
Okay.
For the next one, I'm going to have something to share.
Good. Now, welcome, Perry. Long time no see.
Hey, Sebastian, how you doing?
Hello. So Perry is one of the OG people interested in Hydra long ago already, and always been there. And I think that's just welcome to our latest form of just chatting about Hydra, but not only Hydra. You might have seen the charter, just as a reminder to read me on this repo. But it starts with Hydra, maybe concretely the roadmap, what's going on, the use cases, the pains maybe and wishes of Tudor and Ilya from using Hydra maybe. It doesn't need to stop there, and that's also why we have interested practitioners from the ecosystem, like Kenya and other working on other layer 2 solutions, even some kind of common standardization efforts and past topics have been. So, all right. Good. So as we don't have much about UGraph or interoperability of Lightning today, although we could talk about it, I'm going to briefly mention that I will be unavailable for a few of these meeting groups in October, November, maybe October, November, and December, definitely. So I'll be looking at who would be motivated to kind of organize one of these meetings when I'm not around. Any co-chair interests, kind of somebody who wants to collect topics. If there are, hold the meeting. If not, then not.
I could help run a meeting. I'm not saying I could always run it, but because it's middle of workday for me, but I definitely could run some.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's already very nice that you volunteer for. I mean, we have it every 2 weeks, right? And we, as you've seen, this working group channel on the Intersect Discord, maybe by just asking, is there anything to, Kylie, are you ready with your UGraph announcement, demo, whatever, right? Or Noon, who is, by the way, the lead engineer on Hydra at IoG, especially when I'm not around. Maybe there's something to share or talk about or get community involvement, clarity on any of these things could be good for an agenda item. That's cool. So you have, of course, the allowance to just hold one of the future meetings. I think everything's prepared and just continue be just scheduled. The current member list is on the invitee list. If new people join, you could, I think, invite them too on top, or just hold off to that and shoot. But yeah,
okay,
lovely. Future meetings. So I'm by the way becoming a father, so that's why I'm not around, right?
Oh, congratulations! That's awesome. Yeah, so don't ask me to do a May and June. I'll be getting married then, so you know we'll can balance each other.
Yeah, okay. So you might be finding other people. So that's great to see. Okay. Now, Mr. Cojer, Perry, we had an interesting discussion kind of starting already a bit on this working group. And I would just use that maybe to use the time here to chat a bit more about it. How do we understand one or the other thing, maybe?
Yeah.
So this is more like a spontaneous agenda item, really about maybe interhead Hydra, right? So, or interoperability of layer 2 ledgers overall, of EUTXO ledgers.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. When I think of Hydra, right, it's essentially an off-chain, it is a ledger in itself, right? It's just a mini ledger. I always thought like mini ledger was a great way to define Hydra. And right, it runs all the VM. It just doesn't have to deal with the crazy consensus, and we obviously put our own rules around consensus and snapshotting. I've been playing around with this idea in my head that if you look at how, for example, certain blockchains out there are going for scalability, for example, like how Sui does it. Sui? I don't know how to pronounce Sui. They do a really interesting thing where they actually, for example, they always, every peer-to-peer transfer, so like a simple transaction or transfer of like funds, is actually not dealt with like full consensus, right? They actually go ahead and they take a small quorum of the network and validate that transaction, versus like smart contracts or things like that would be open to like validation by the entire network. And so it's this interesting thing that like everything almost starts at a layer 2 and then transitions into being a layer 1. And I've been playing around with this idea in my head that in some ways, when we talk about like, well, if you integrate Hydra into a wallet, right, it would be very cool to try to mimic the same idea that people can almost live in their own head of sorts with no participants. They're the only participant, but with the head within a head. I don't know what you call it. Like a head within a head, you can actually open up, take a segment of what you've put into your own, right, your own head, as your own participant, and maybe say, okay, well, this piece I'm going to put into a smaller head that I can use to transition or to transact maybe with someone else. And that's a network capacity. It could be inner head capacity. But that idea that I don't necessarily, you kind of then have almost like your own personal Cardano computer as your wallet in some ways, because right, you have the whole VM in like I'm slightly just talking this out loud, so I'd love feedback in this. I've just been thinking about it, but right, this idea that you don't always, if people can operate in their own heads, and then you could run ahead within and be able to then you don't. I don't know. I'm trying to better explain it.
Yeah. So it's interesting, even as you have this example of Sui, right, where you have maybe another blockchain where some of the transactions are not done on full consensus or different validators.
Yeah.
And how would that be safe? And the same question would be also in maybe in this example. You see my mouse here. So in this example here, right, I think this would mean here we have 3 actors: purple or red, green, orange, and each of them have their own head. They're the only validator in their head, and if they want to operate like orange, red, and green, they would basically have now a common ledger across them, but validate on the other head, right? So they don't really kind of.
In this first example, it's just, hey, could I run my own head, right? And then just without having to worry about, I could put a set of my ETXOs in there, funds in there, and I could just automatically spin up, right? Say if I want to transact with several different people, I don't want to transact together with all the participants. I may want to transact individually with like 4 different people at one point, and maybe it's just 1-to-1, right? In that sense. It's almost like opening like a TCP/IP connection, right? Oh, I spin up a head. I take this set of funds I want to transact to, I can move, and with this participant, it allows for some level of like dynamic participation, right? I didn't have to necessarily open a head and then have all the participants in there. I can actually open another head and pick who my participant is for that head and agree upon it. And so this is more, the first image is just like that concept of like, hey, do I always need to, like, if I can open a head and do something on top of it, I think there was a comment, I've watched some of the videos before, where what happens if my own head, like, right, my own head drops or the other person's head drops, and what happens? But at the same point, it doesn't really matter because I'm the only participant in my head. I own the, I can restart that head again. I can also then take my head and potentially bring it offline and then also just spin it back up, right? Because everything would still be in the contract. I can just go back to my latest snapshot, pull it up. And so and then when I want to be online, I can then spin up the inner head to work with someone else, right? And it's just an interesting play on, like, you get your own little like Cardano computer is kind of the way I think of it in my head, where you can try to transact and you don't have to deal with some of the always opening a new head to start open with a set of participants. And so that's the basic idea of this one, just of like, that's more meant to be peer-to-peer. But if you think of if you tried to think of like, hey, how could we actually start from everyone working on the layer 2 and doing the most basic transactions from the layer 2, and obviously in Sui's example, they're using quorums and things like that, versus, right, I just need to agree with my other, most transactions in this entire world, right, are I swipe my credit card, giving them permission to essentially take funds. 40,000 transactions per second from Visa, just Visa alone, versus like the NASDAQ, which is like, order book, right? It's like only 23. So if you think of like just most financial transactions are one-to-one. It's really nice when you can do larger, quote unquote, coordinated activities, and maybe the layer 1's a little bit better. Although with some of these inner head Hydra things, it might be more possible. But how can you think of everything from L2 capacity, and then the user just has to go, and only forcing the L1 or the user to go to the L1 when they really need to? And that's kind of like the basic concept of like, hey, like, if you could live as even a user in my own Hydra head, and because I don't technically even need to run the head, right? In a managed capacity, I just spin up like a cloud server with my latest snapshot, then I run it. And that's my wallet almost. So that was
I think these ideas of like kind of your personal kind of Cardano interface, right? So you have your head, and this is basically the way you can interact with this one now peer-to-peer big thing, which exists of layer 2 ledgers, right?
Yeah,
and making this your own instance work with the rest is, I think, the key.
Yeah, of course.
To many of these more open protocols, right? So you just want to bid on an auction or go for this swap here on the centralized exchange or so, right? But you come and want to leave again, and this is also this dynamic participation. What you mean is maybe could be interesting, are key factors here.
Yeah.
In particular, right, if we dive more into this, I'm still worried here, right, that, for example, red does not. So what does it even mean here, right? So if we have kind of ledger here, this means if green has their own view and say, okay, these are UTXOs which exist in my head, right? And red has another one, right? And if you want to make sure that something goes from here to here, you would want to make sure that it doesn't exist in red anymore. It starts existing in green, right? And to be sure that this is even the case, right? You cannot be sure by not being part of the consensus at that other end, right? At least in a part. So this is, I think, but from the outside, right? The idea of having like small or big or many of these off-chain ledgers and be able to combine them and reuse their existence in all kinds of applications and have things work across of these small ledgers or shards, right? And you basically link to relics here, which is actually also built by this very, very idea that if we have a sharded ledger space, how can we make meaningful transactions across this otherwise fractioned state? And braiding is what they call it. I have not really researched much here, but it reminds me actually a lot of the Interhead Hydra. Let me just bring this up briefly. So this is the. I'm missing my screens here.
And I'll just I've always had it. Like I've thought that like having to replicate I sent you $5 and replicate it across 3,000 machines like in that transaction is kind of wild. I don't need everyone to agree on that. And it becomes very painful. This is a
so I've just not fully reread, but I seen it earlier this year, right? So it was published, I believe, end of last year. And Max is actually the guy who wrote the original Interhead Hydra paper, which was really virtual state channels of two ledgers, like one head, we do another head on top, which you have an intermediary basically being in both heads, and they would just sign off everything which is already about these two heads, right? But this one here is a slightly different page, which reminds me a lot more about this kind of braiding, or as you say, maybe transactions across smaller ledgers, right? And so here we have basically this is one ledger here, another one, and we basically want to make synchronous execution of a transaction on both heads, right? So it's more like it's not fully synchronous, it's more like a commitment scheme. So you commit, and then the other one it has an atomic transaction on both ledgers at the same time. That would basically make general. So it's always about like kind of wrapping something in one ledger, and then with that thing as a proof for the other one, you can be sure that okay, it cannot be double spent, right? And by the nature of UTXOs, by default, fractioning or kind of UTXO ledgers are very good in capturing on substates and also making sure the substates are then combinable again, right, in the bigger state, right? All our applications on Cardano are built this way. So even a DEX is built this way. It has state captured in UTXOs. Now, if you want to bring in your bid in an order book or whatever, right, it is a new UTXO which needs to be considered. Now, if you want to make this kind of, for example, if you have this big pool of maybe bids or let's take a simple example. I think auctions are good, right? You have the big auction and people put down bids there, right? But they don't want to put down their bids. Maybe you don't know in advance who is going to bid on that auction. So you can't have everyone's money they want to bid on in the same ledger from the beginning. So you want to have this more open way of auctioning where people can come and go. So they come. What does it mean to come? Basically, they have something which they want to make available to this bigger ledger, which is the one which hosts the auction. But in order to participate, you need somebody who is involved in the bigger ledger to open a ledger review, an off-chain ledger, and we can basically then bridge from this off-chain ledger into the big one. So we can make sure, okay, we spend something in the small user channel, in the bigger auction channel, and the guy who is in both is the intermediary, right? And that person, that operator, is involved in both of these ledgers. So we would maybe, ideally, right, we could then braid these two otherwise off-chain ledgers together in a way where we don't even need to go back to the layer one, just by purely executing the UTXO ledger model on both of these substrates or ledgers. And it's even not only Hydra specific, I would say. That is a technique which applies to any, if for example here, right? So this is about a technique to the wrapping and unwrapping, they call it, right? It's a commitment scheme. You commit to something and you can only take it out if you prove a witness from the other side, right? That's very simple, but also common technique. HTLCs is a subset of this. You lock something into a hash, you can only show by showing the hash, the secret to the hash, you can unlock it again. And so we can pay forward an atomic overall transaction across otherwise distinct ledgers. Adaptive signatures are similar, I would say. where basically by applying one transaction, you reveal a witness which you can consume on another end. So it's kind of paired execution in that sense. And this thing, and I need to review it, and maybe this is just, we're not doing it in all detail here, right? But this could be a similar technique to just make sure that something progresses across two ledgers at the same time, right? From one state to another. And that could be interesting to get two ledger states together. The problem is there can be a dispute, and this is where otherwise maybe in the happy path, right, you can basically bridge any kind of EUTXO ledgers this way. But if there is a dispute, right, what is the language you use to fight the dispute, right? In which core? Will it be a Hydra head in itself, or will it be on the layer one? That is maybe the interoperability challenge here.
That makes sense to me. Right? I mean, like, you are even, doesn't matter if it's a roll up or state channels, right? Like, there is some set of always a dispute mechanism that needs to be involved. I think the nice thing that they display in here is that they're actually disputing individual UTXOs and not even the entire transaction, which is always really nice. That you can say, hey, I could do 1,000 transaction. If one of them isn't valid, right? You can at least dispute that one transaction and keep moving. I think that is, yeah, because you're wrapping a specific UTO, so disputed. But yeah, okay, so yeah, it's doing one. So to me, that's like that to me is like, right, if we took it on our head and said, hey, great, this, if everyone's really thinking, once again, starting from what is the simplest, easiest transactions that you can do, and you could take a lot of them and pull them off of that level one and create this network that people can move through. Yes, there will be some level of like fraud proofs or intermediate or like I kind of use the word watchtower in my head, but like that's not exactly it. But but the whole point, if you make it the computation extremely easy to verify, which is the UTXO is like really good at that, and Cardano is really good at like verifying off-chain computation, right? I don't even need to run the computation on-chain. I just need to show that the computation is right. It makes, for I'm not saying everything should be on the L2. So there are definitely things that are really important to be on the L1 for your reason, but like that $5 between you and me, I'm pretty sure we can trust it and things like that. And yeah, so this is I think this is actually closer because I saw the inner head, but this is interesting. I don't know if we can steal. I'm sure the researcher's like busy on other things, but I'm kind of curious.
I think it's recurring. It's recurring. The same thing is recurring again. Right? It's always about this is ultimately this is cross-chain communication.
Yeah.
But this is about bridging too, right? It's basically bridging funds from one L2 head to another L2 head. It's bridging funds from one ledger to another ledger. It's bridging funds from one blockchain to another blockchain. What is the difference? I mean, it's just a ledger with a foreign consensus ultimately, right? And
I see.
we can do that here. For example, most of the cross-chain communication is kind of bounded by, how would you know whether this really happened on the other end, right? How can you verify the consensus of the other foreign system, right? And in this case, for example, if you use Hydra heads in both ends, you can be sure if there is one party being in both heads. That's full security there, right? Because it's a naive but full security consensus, which is everybody signs, right? It's a multi-signature ultimately. So this is kind of one way we can be sure, right? As soon as we talk about, I think, I'm not sure if Midcat would be like a full EUTXO ledger, but assume it is. Let's take an EUTXO sidechain or rollup. Whoever validates that, right? If it's an optimistic one, right? You basically have you have not full security, right? You say, okay, I do trust. I would be able to detect whether they cheat, right? So this is maybe where the watchtowers come in, right? Which would go for a bounty to kind of prove them wrong. But otherwise, right, we cannot fully be sure that this has actually happened on the other end. We could still make this bound by this, but then the question is, what if it's not happened, right? And this is what the tricky thing usually is about cross-chain communication. And Kanye has some more pointers here in the chat. Yeah, go on.
Just a question. I'm sure you guys have thought about that, and you also mentioned something about a bounty. But at least on the Lightning Network, the way they're doing a non-custodial wallet, so you don't have to run the node, is that they have kind of distributed watchdog services that just scour the network and try to find invalid transaction states and then get a bounty from that. Is that something similar, or is that something you guys even consider?
I can answer for Hydra because there we don't need that, because especially if you're if you're a first class citizen, you have the state to dispute yourself. If you want to make this more of a, you don't want to keep that state yourself, you want to have somebody else to watch out for you, right? Then you could give the state to them and then just go offline, and they would be checking your back, right? In the pessimistic case of the optimistic protocol. And this is then very similar to, like, I think a Lightning channel would get watched for. And which, by the way, is also very similar how an optimistic rollup works, right?
Yeah.
You just claim this is correct, and somebody and everyone interested can watch and prove them wrong using this one or the other state tracking and verification technique.
But I meant more in the sense of the interhead Hydra, because you're going to have the dispute between the two different heads. So
yeah, this is the biggest question mark for me right now here, right? I'm not so much concerned about the actual synchronous execution in the happy path, right? But what happens if you wrap here and you can't, or what happens if you can't unlock on the other end, right? Is it, I think we can go far by saying, oh yeah, it just didn't happen. Do we need to punish them or not, right? Because it depends a bit on what kind of ledger we're talking about. Is it expensive that this didn't happen, right? That you maybe have a delay on this one transaction which didn't happen synchronously, right? Fast enough, right? What if somebody just prevents you doing the thing on the other end, right? Is it protocol violation? Can you punish them in one way or another, right? And what that mechanism will be, I'm not super convinced that what is in this paper will be the answer right away, right? I'm just saying this is similar to maybe what Radix does in braiding, that we have synchronous execution across shards, and there is this, of course, this parallel to adapter signatures or HDLCs in the most trivial sense, and I think this is even motivated in the very beginning, right? That of course, right, HDLCs are kind of limited to payments across ledgers, right? And making it more generic, for example, that you collect a bid or a vote or something across ledgers, you would do that in a more generic, and this is how it kind of this paper goes about. Yeah, so the punishment consensus or the dispute phase of whatever inter-ledger communication is needed is the most question, I think, to me. But it would be very interesting to research, and I'm actually looking forward maybe to say that. I was considering putting in a catalyst proposal for like really exploring this a bit, maybe more in case of Hydra, but not only limited to Hydra, right? So of course this could be like a basis where any kinds of ultimately EUTXO layer ledgers, right? That's the answer here, right? And in fact, right, you could consider the layer one also some of this ledger, right? In the end, it's basically how you could swap something into a layer two, right? It's just the same thing.
No, and I think that is an interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So one cool thing is that I've seen that you've done some Raft work, or at least some Raft ideas on the issue. And the cool thing is that if everyone is running the same code and they have to sign everything, you can kind of assume that for Hydra channels, all the participants are not going to be Byzantine, or if they are, they're going to be a very small minority. So you can just use like Raft, view stamp replication, or kind of like a three-phase commit.
Yeah. So making something a layer two gives you freedoms because it can fall back to layer one if need be, right? In a catastrophic case. And it's actually why Hydra is in some ways simpler than Cardano, right? So we have simpler communication requirements. And That's true, yeah.
Yeah,
so I'm
and
starting
also
to take notes a bit on the side.
I can write notes. I should be writing notes.
Anyone, right? Just we crowdsource the notes after in the repo as we do.
That's fair. I'll rewatch it.
We should just have a bot like doing the transcription.
Yeah, maybe.
There are way too many services that do that.
That's the co-chair to set up.
Okay, I'll find us a bot.
No, whatever, right? Anyone can just bring one and say, hey, I'm gonna be the secretary, or this guy is my AI agent to do it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think right, because like this is, as long as you're creating like, and this is the promise of not just Hydra but layer 2, right? And the problem with, or the problem that Ethereum has run into, right? Ethereum, which they did a lot of awesome things, right? They allowed a really vibrant ecosystem. There are a lot of cool different rollups that are coming, but they're, you have like ZK Sync all doing really interesting stuff. So you get a lot of like exploration in the space, but they really didn't create any coordination layer between all of them, right? And when I say layer, really standardization. And so certain things, like Midgard and Hydra, right? It would be really nice that like you do have use cases and applications where, hey, I want to work at a DEX, or I want to do this, this, and this. Being able to decide, hey, I want to move right into Midgard very easily is like pretty compelling. And once again, it's if my life as a user, I'm just thinking of like, hey, I'm always kind of coming from the layer 1 and then bringing up. But like if you're always bringing from layer 2 into the layer 1, you're ultimately always going to be more efficient in many ways.
So I can imagine one future world we live in. And one, for example, is you use a light wallet, right? Whatever, for some parts of your fortune. And that one is offered to you by one of the same people we know right now, maybe Eternal, or I want to use Eternal, Nami or Lace or whatever, right? They offer that to you. So you have already kind of a relationship into the Cardano ecosystem through that. First, you get free or virtually free instant payments between you and anyone else who's using also a reasonably modern wallet. So basically, you have payments across like Lightning style payments, right? At least between you and your other fellow same wallet users. That's the most trivial thing to achieve. But that's the first step. Now you have already this relationship to, let's take Eternal, Titan, Stake Pool. They're cool. So if this relationship is you have already, now somebody comes and builds this awesome DEX. And this DEX is not only hosted on the layer 1 for the big fish to trade on, right? Or maybe the more important slow trades, but for this very fast, more fast, high frequency trading, there's another pool which is in this one fancy layer 2. Let's call it Midgard. And this thing is fully isomorphic in that sense. It just works Cardano too. And that means in this scenario, you already have a relationship to Eternal, to somebody in this ecosystem who basically can also offer some kind of service, right? They have more infrastructure as you running, access to the layer 1 chain information and all these kinds of things. Now, ideally, you would not need to move your funds you already have, maybe in your Eternal wallets, through some transactions you need to pay for into this other layer 2, which is chosen by this one dApp, right? And this might be a sidechain, or this might be like a head they operate themselves or whatever. Now, ideally, you can already use something is available to you in the Hydra layer 2 to interact that funds that you take, so you have there already, you can then use to do something on this other layer 2, which is the Midgard layer 2. And the intermediaries you trust, actually you don't need to trust anyone, because the intermediaries need themselves a path to, so basically we would have one ledger between you and Eternal. This is the same one you use for payments between you and other Eternal users or other wallet users. But then there is another channel between Eternal and somebody, at this Midgard, or maybe they directly observe the layer 2 and are like a watchtower validator. So they do the stuff needed to make sure that this layer 2 behaves correctly, right? Which is an optimistic rollup maybe. So they have a belief that this Midgard L2 is sound, and we can just, if we see something happen there, we can be sure this is true because we validate the things too. And if they're not behaving, we get to punish them anyways, and they rake in the big what's it called, the big money. So Eternal has that confidence, but you as a small guy, right, just having your phone and no server, which is always on and observing the state proofs of whatever L2, you don't trust that right away, right? So Hydra could be a trusted entry point to somebody, just to, okay, now you have something, you want to transact on that ledger, and the Eternal behaves as an intermediary, which ensures the synchronous execution of what you say with the ledger between you also happens on the other end in a way to interact with the DEX. And I think that would be great to have. I'm not sure if this interoperability of L2 ledgers or this braiding or cross execution of like EUTXO transactions gets us there. I can't tell right now, but that would be a cool future, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
At least for me, it would fix the 4th of my 5 milestones. It's like, please do this fast.
We could get that tomorrow, right, Sebastian? Easy.
Yeah, no. Probably way longer than your first prototype. But yeah, that's I imagine that would be a fun thing to explore, really.
Yeah. And like, right, you can even then do double duty, like Midgard fraud, or watchtower, things that are looking for fraud can also do other things, right? You could even pull from interesting things start to happen when you could per se almost like Hydra could act like a partner chain. If you want to use those valid, like Midgard could say, hey, do you want to be not partner chains in, how do I think this? Partner chain in the sense that you can always pull a validator set, right? That's what partner chains are in my mind. It's like I can go and ask a subset or just say, hey, who wants to be of the Cardano validator set, the SPOs, who wants to act and help me out, right? And I don't need to go find them. So like you could in some way say, hey, who wants to act as a watchtower protocol for these things? And you can share that, right? Midgard, or you need that for an inner head, or that between, you can kind of pull from that pool, and you are pulling from a general partner chain. And there's obviously the VRF, so you get some you get some security on the quorum that you're choosing from. So you're getting some I won't say you're getting you're not getting full security, but some security by reusing that. So you don't have to go find them. And it's also, this is where I think even the original documents, like SPOs are some of the best to be running. Like you imagine running Hydra nodes. I just also imagine Hydra nodes could be spun up anywhere on any AWS server, like up and down very quickly, right? So you want them to.
Let me ask something very, very dumb. But you talk about partner chains. Got me thinking that maybe we could have a partner chain that the only thing that they do is that they get paid to kind of control, in a sense, both cross-heads and cross-ledger communication. So every time they're going to bridge something, this network is going to be sequencing them in a sense.
No, I could see it.
Yeah, I think Spotlight. It's something that I need to have more hours in the day, man. It's terrible.
Yeah.
I've been just taking notes, so I didn't pay attention. Sorry, in case the question was geared toward me.
No, I was just saying that we could have a partner chain that only takes care about sequencing this interledger communication.
That sounds very much like the typical sharding, right? So you have one chain which is a beacon chain, and the other ones which are the shards, which just follow up. And whereas maybe a sharded network is really very structured exactly that way, right? There's this one clear hierarchy, right? Whereas maybe that we have this sidechain or this rollup and this small state channel here, and there is few hundreds of state channels because they're much cheaper than the sidechain. It's just really a chaotic but also heterogeneous landscape, right? And if you somehow can still make sure these things are kind of with small or even no friction, that would be just great, right? If there is this one way to interact still, even though there is this many modes of operation. And maybe the common denominator really is the UTXO, right? The EUTXO language. That's it, right? That's basically the common denominator we can agree on, and which is good enough for many things, for payments, for most smart contracts, right? Maybe not good enough for governance on the overall layer 1 of Cardano, because this is kind of outside of the scope of the basic UTXO model, right? It's basically just on the side, rewards, accounts, and so on, right? But for many things we built on Cardano, they all speak EUTXO ultimately.
Yeah.
You also
go on, Perry.
I was going to say, you also have this interesting concept where even like Vitalik, right, came back and said plasma. We can do plasma now, like in ZK. He was even when he was talking, with the ZK framework, but he was even talking about still keeping a UTX. The plasma is still like the benefits of the UTXO. If you also at one point say you want to create some sort of cross chain, like a state channel network that could also go cross chain, right? It's really, you could still have the head working like the UTXO model, right? But they just create there's obviously a translation between what happens there down to to Ethereum L1. And so you can do, as long as you're all kind of working the same language in the heads, you can say, hey, I've actually opened technically a head on the Ethereum network now, and they need to work, right? The global state obviously adds like complexity, but like I even think to me like a Bitcoin, right? You could like run, it'd be very interesting to essentially, I could lock my Bitcoin, actually do all my transaction technically in a Cardano, whatever else, and blah, 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 and then spit out back to my Bitcoin at a more competitive rate. And I can do much more like much more expressiveness, right, with the UTXO model. And you would, Bitcoin would never have to know. And with certain things and atomic swaps, right, you could even pay for it technically in different ways, which is really interesting. So like to me, Hydra like offers state channels to other. It's easier, right, with the UTXO model. But there's interesting.
It can be this adapter, right? So whatever you, if you can establish a UTXO, extended UTXO ledger on top of anything, right? That thing is right away much more composable than the account-based model, right? Because the main difference between what takes, I think, an account model from a UTXO model apart is just that the UTXO is natively marking required state for transitions or transactions. Whereas in the account model, you can't know in advance, or it's not as straightforward, especially when it becomes like the interaction is not a single spend from like plus minus here and there, right? But rather you can modify the accounts throughout, right? Then it becomes really hard to determine, okay, what is the relevant state, and make sure this state can change at the same time in another place on another ledger, right? And that these things can be torn apart and combined again without conflicting is quite hard to do after the fact. I think I lost the connection briefly.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
No, I just say if you don't do, like, if the application is not geared to be that your state is done in this fraction but combinable way, right? Basically, the exercise everybody's forced to do on Cardano, which is go make a DEX, but make it work for UTXO model, right? That means that there's no global state. That needs to be like combinable. You need to think about how things are kind of sequenced because it's explicit there, not implicit by the ledger. This makes it's much more admissible for separating things across ledgers and making things combinable again. Still, it's not an afterthought and harder. That's why I think also state channels are were much harder on account-based ledgers like Ethereum,
Yeah.
where it's actually quite trivial to do, although we take a long while to implement it. It's actually quite trivial to do on UTXO, right? Because it's natural, it's more native separation of state and combining.
Yeah. One thing I want to say is that Hydra is shard. Hydra is a sharded environment. Just because we're not having to reinvent computer science and do all forms of NP algorithms to have it, doesn't mean that they're not sharded. So we are already at a point where we can start to rely on like normal non-Byzantine literature on sharding itself, because there's a lot that we have not explored on crypto. There's normal part of distributed systems when they do not have by Byzantine actors.
Mm-hmm. That's true, right? Yeah.
The one thing I was going to also add is that ZK can be such a buzzword sometimes, but I think one of the really interesting things, especially like obviously the way you're going to be doing the decommits, right, with the BLS, is like really, really interesting. But right, you can add ZK into the consensus, right, between participants, or like various different things that make things, obviously a participant can't at least see what you're exactly doing, or you're passing around a proof, right? And so it makes it harder for people to try to censor something or like hurt the liveliness of a head in that sense. But the benefit is because like we don't have to worry about the global L1, like your phone or your computer, right? It could take, there's obviously a latency piece that comes to this, but just by adding things that are proofs based, and I just have to worry that my phone can handle proof. Maybe it takes 1 second to generate, but like, it costs me 3 seconds anyways when I tap my phone, right? And so like, what is the latency trade-off? You can kind of choose that. But there are also,
it's 5 seconds on my iPhone 12, by the way. I tested like the smallest bit code that you can on any ZKVM, and it was like 5 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, right. And this may not be the right time to look at it, but like, right, it's just an interesting way that as we say, like that time, proving time and everything, creating proofs is getting smaller and smaller. At some point, like this is where like even some of the benefits when people like state channels, which is just so underexplored because everyone like they were kind of hard. Everyone like went to roll-ups, and then you're like, no one did any research on it. And this was kind of going back to the last conversation when people are like, well, why have no one done anything on state channels? Well, I don't know, Ethereum, Bitcoin kind of had bad experiences and walked away, and no one really, I think, built it the right way. So there's a lot of things that can continue to be done to optimize it. So I know it's a slight tangent that's not so helpful, but you're already doing it in some ways, right? The BLS accumulator proofs and things like that, which is interesting.
We're about to do that. This is maybe one way how we represent the state,
But it's also a really interesting way that, like, number one, I can also decommit, but like, and I think Phil made a comment there. It's also a really easy way to just quickly spit out like a new state transition back onto L1. You could, when you want to. And you can do it like, obviously rollups have a cadence to them, but like there's nothing saying that you could just do it on demand as you want to, and that's how you kind of would keep. Say you had like a Hydra wallet that like you put, like, it's, to me it's almost like a checking account and a savings account, right? You have your stuff in L1, but you keep stuff in the L2, right? And you make the transactions, you kind of post and say, hey, this is what the state is. If my head went offline, I can just pull it back up, right, really quickly. And I could just restart without any cost, right? I don't think there would be a cost to restart because the Hydra head's running there, right? There's no cost on the L1 just to pick it back up where I was in some ways as a user. And so I'm sure I'm giving you lots of things to think about.
Just trying to kind of maybe if I may summarize, maybe just other ways we can use ZK already in a way to kind of overcome some of the limitations of these other. If it wouldn't, I mean, right now Hydra heads are basically multi-sig snapshots. That's kind of multi-sig state channels. So you have multiple people validate the transition, and then they sign off on the resulting UTXO state, right? And this one is actually the thing you can take back, but you don't bring back. Only when you want, you bring it back. And now the question is, maybe can we use a bit more CK here already to maybe overcome some of these natural limitations of needing some multiple validators, for example, or not allowing a big number of validators at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Sebastian, just so we don't lose too much time. Change the subject. Can you give us an update on what's happening on incremental commits? I'm very interested.
Maybe
this white whale.
No, maybe Noon can give a latest update to close off this meeting anyways, 5 minutes. So what's the situation on concretely what's going on in the team?
Good question. What's going on in the team? I should know, hey, because I literally just posted our updates for the last 2 weeks. But yeah, incremental commits, I think like you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, Sebastian, but like there was a bit of work we did, like splitting out a whole bunch of functionality into an extra library. And I think into this Hydra TX library. So that was done, I forget exactly why, but we did that. And now I think with the main bulk of the work, I think Sasha's like almost at a point to commit to merge a branch that does like all the offline parts, or is the online parts done as well? So
it's the between off-chain and on-chain.
Right.
But we have Happy Path working, right? So basically you can now incremental commits goes with deposits and recovery. So we basically have it in a 2-stage process. If you want to take something into the head, you deposit, and then the head picks it up, or one of the Hydra node sees it and picks it up, and then it integrates it into the head, which we call an increment. So this is it works in principle end to end, and we are about to carve out this PR, which is making this possibility. Notably missing from this is while specified, not yet implemented and rigorously tested, because we don't implement on-chain code without having the tests first. So we have mutation tests to test for when the validator should prevent the transaction, and then only we add the implementation. So this is why we have a separate step to add the on-chain security about the most important part, which is this increment, the decision, what is actually brought into the head. And that is missing still. So it's in progress, I would say, overall. You can give it a spin from the outside, like how it feels like, how it can be used from the API as a user, already on a branch and soon on master. It's probably landing next week or so, but it's not yet ready to be released yet, because we don't release it without the on-chain security. You can read up also on how it's done, very much on the feature item, which maybe Noon can link also into the chat, just but you might know already from the GitHub.
Yeah.
And is that, just curious, is that mechanism something that can be used right by like Midgard, right? Is it, obviously they may not want to or split it off, but like the same idea, like it's almost a bridge, right? Or it's a place to lock, like a locking type thing. But like,
so incremental commits is a bridge into the head, and decommits is a bridge out of the head. It's basically the native bridging mechanism of the Hydra head L2, if you want to say so, right? Okay. Notably, how we did it is, especially the commit part, is heavily inspired of the concept of George on Hydra Zero. Yeah. So he's been looking at that a lot about it, and also the fact to separate the things you want to bring in from the actual bringing in. Is also something, and which would be more prominent on these persistent L2s, right? A sidechain or a rollup, where you basically have this, you set it up, and if you want to bring something in, you need to post it to some transaction, and people are more natural to just come and go into this more persistent layer 2, right? Whereas in the Hydra head, that's why we didn't have it in the beginning, in the paper, right, it was only like, oh, this could be done, right? But a state channel starts more with the people already being there and knowing what they want to use in the state channel and not adding things after the fact. But reality is more often than not, right, you have maybe even asymmetric channels where it goes only from one direction into another, right? So you start with everything empty. Somebody brings something in, you transact until it's used up for example, paying an API on every request or so, and then you top it up again, right? So it always fills in from one side and depletes on the other end. And this is a more flexible way to use it.
I unfortunately have to drop because I have my meeting. I'm meeting. So this is really,
good call,
really awesome.
co-chair. Wrapping it up, that's nice.
I see I've gotten the day already. Yeah. So yeah, let me know what those dates are. So do you think it's the next one you're gonna have the issue, or?
So planned only in 1 month. So I'm definitely going to miss the one in
Sebastian's going to have that issue for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Everybody asks me this. So in 2 weeks, I might still be setting things up and moderating. In case not, I might shoot you a message, Perry, or you just realize like one day ahead, right? You're invited now, and it's every 2 weeks.
Yep.
If there's nothing happened on preparation or a message from me, then I might not do it, and you can still see there is something to talk about. Continue maybe this or another conversation. Have Kyla do a demo of this new graph or whatever. Don't worry if it's not happening. It's just more of a best effort here. And I enjoyed this conversation today. Thanks everybody for bringing in this quite ad hoc but lively discussion. And I think the recording will also be nice. Maybe something even to harvest out of it. Good thoughts today.
Awesome.
Thank you everyone
Good day,
for your
everyone.
time, for listening to my
Thanks,
app.
everyone.
All right. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Cheers.